It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, well, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We have John Clarke, who is a Washington, D.C. attorney involved in some incredible stuff. We spent the first 15 minutes talking about his work with the MIA POWs from the Southeast Asia there, from the Vietnam War, and he's working on that. Some breaking news, I think, with that. And then we've been talking about Vince Foster. Now, John, I have a question for you, because you mentioned that the reason the FBI got involved was because he was a White House employee who had a certain level of salary. Now, my question to you is, how soon did the FBI get involved, and could they so quickly determine that he worked at the White House? If it's a suicide, how did this, and what his salary was, and that he's he worked for the White House, and what his level of salary was?
Well, they didn't. I did that. And the point I was making was that the FBI had mandatory primary jurisdiction. They had to take the case. They didn't. They just covered it up. They interviewed far more people than essentially the Park Police didn't interview anyone, and they closed it as a suicide. But the FBI, the official line was that the Park Police were conducting an investigation, and the FBI was supporting the Park Police in a supportive role. Well, that's just ridiculous. Number one, nobody has talked about the fact that the FBI had primary jurisdiction. That was the point of that, to show that the FBI had to investigate, but they didn't. They left it with the Park Police. And in Washington, we know that the Park Police oftentimes are used to cover things up. There's this sort of mantra that goes around saying, well, there's been all these investigations. There were 2 congressional investigations, the Park Police, the independent counsel, Robert Fisk, and the independent counsel, Kenneth Starr. Well, what people should realize is that the common denominator in every single investigation is the FBI. They investigated first. They investigated under Fisk. They investigated under Starr. In fact, they had the same investigators, the very same agents under both Fisk and Starr, the same agents. So, the FBI doesn't have a really good record of turning themselves in and admitting that they're involved in a cover-up. Once you start, you have to continue. And that's why it was really quite sad that Ken Starr was, just kind of a yes man. We call him an empty suit. He just went along with whatever the FBI wanted him to do, and they used the very same agents.
I got 2 questions for you. One is, you mentioned that the Park Police are involved in other cover-ups. Do you have any examples of that?
No, I don't really want to get into that. I don't really have anything solid.
No problem. And the other one is Ken Starr. What do you make? A lot of people. What's your opinion of Ken Starr? A lot of people think that he's been running interference for the Clintons since back in Mena, Arkansas.
Well, I don't have a very high opinion of him. He's a politician. We know from the 3-judge court of appeals. Ken Starr was a Court of Appeals judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. So he worked with at least one of the judges. Was his colleague who appointed him, and that we know that from some of the correspondence that we got in later years, that there was some dissension among those 3-judge panel as to whether or not Ken Starr should be appointed. He's a politician. He recently was discredited, Ken Starr, through his investigation of sexual assaults at Baylor University. And this is fairly recent. To investigate, he called up one of his some friends he had in one of these blue chip, large powerhouse law firms, and had them investigate. And they, did what Ken Starr did. They covered it up. They didn't, they kind of soft pedaled the whole thing. And then Ken Starr and then that finally came to light what he had done. And he's no longer the chancellor. He was fired as chancellor. They kept him on as an instructor, a teacher at Baylor. But he's an empty suit. He's a politician.
Well, don't forget also too. He was just recently the attorney for Jeffrey Epstein in that big pedophile case down there in Florida. And one of Epstein's close friends is Bill Clinton again. He was on the plane, and Epstein's his pimp, this Ghislaine Maxwell, actually attended the Chelsea Clinton's wedding. So it just seems to me he's a lot more cozy with these people that's
kind of the incestuous relationship in Washington. People think, or the news media tells us that the Republicans and the Democrats are fighting. They're all on the same team. They're all fighting for the same thing, and that is credibility.
And you would know this because you're a K Street lawyer, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you would know this because you're right there in the midst of all these people, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now, what about Miguel? You mentioned also, too, how they say, well, this has been investigated to death, and it's a conspiracy theory, nothing's happened. What about Miguel Rodriguez? He actually resigned from this, didn't he?
Well, he was pushed out, yeah. He wasn't going to go along. We have these tapes. As I said, Reed Irvine taped all his conversations, and he spent a lot of time on the phone with Miguel Rodriguez, and we have posted those tapes on the internet. You can go to the quickest way to find them is go to our website, FBICoverup.com, and the tapes are there, and you can hear Miguel telling Reed all about the cover-up and how he was run out of the office. So I mean, if you wanted to find out whether that was a cover-up, who would you ask? You would ask the prosecutor who was in charge of the Foster death probe. I mean, the independent counsel's office had, I think, 6 various investigations that it was conducting, and the Foster matter was one of them. And Miguel Rodriguez was in charge, and he was a straight shooter, and so they ran him out of the office. He couldn't get subpoenas served. He had problems with the deputy independent counsel. It threatened him. On the phone, he says they threatened his family. They threatened him. He sort of fought the good fight for a while there. And he spoke to all these journalists. I mean, he talked to over 100 journalists on the phone. Spent a lot of time with them. He said he spent 10 hours with Steve Levitan of the New York Times. 10 hours on the phone. Steve Levitan knows all about it. So after Ken Starr's report was issued, Steve Levitan said, the Starr report dismisses the testimony of the much-touted witness Patrick Knowlton. Well, what Steve Levitan didn't tell his readers was that evidence that I submitted on Patrick's behalf, evidence of a cover-up that was ordered attached to Ken Starr's report. I mean, how dishonest can you be?
What does Miguel Rodriguez say today? Does he talk about this today? Now that's
it. Won't talk at all. In fact, I went to go see him in California when I was out there, and I showed up at his office at 7:00, and he knew I was coming. He went in the back door. He wouldn't talk to me. Reed Irvine flew out to California to talk with him. He wouldn't talk to Reed. He's not talking.
It's interesting, again, how you said he was threatened and stuff like that. The same thing happened with the federal prosecutor down in Florida who was investigating Epstein. They went after him, too. You're familiar with that story, right?
Well, I am. I did not know about the threats to the prosecutor, but it doesn't, I don't exactly fall off my chair to hearing that.
Yeah, he wrote a 3-page letter as well describing what happened to him. They were investigating him. They were investigating his relatives, his wife, his family, and the George Bush down there was putting pressure on him. The federal government was putting pressure on him. Pretty much the same kind of thing. Now, you mentioned before that you wanted to talk about Kyle, who discovered the body.
Yeah, he didn't discover the body. He just didn't. The Fisk report the FBI's FISC report, said that they interviewed Kyle, and then he had and they did a detailed interview, and he knew things and said things that were not public, and then he passed the test of veracity. They said that they interviewed the Park Service workers who he reported the incident to, the body, and after a detailed comparison of the Park Service workers with Dale Kyle's account, as I said, he passed the test of veracity. Well, when you compare what the Park Service worker says and Dale Kyle, when you compare them, they don't agree on anything. One of them said he was in his car, or another one said he was walking. Kyle says he was in a white truck. One of the Park Service people described it as a green truck. Dale Kyle said that he drove into the Park Service into the facility down the road from Fort Marcy Park to the facility, and he was going to call 911, but he couldn't find a phone. The phones weren't there, so he just told the Park Service worker. Well, we have a photograph that's in the website showing that when you drive into the park, there's these two phones. I mean, you just can't miss them. You just can't miss them. I mean, they're right there when you drive in. You can't miss them. Dale Kyle said they sat back behind some bushes or something. I mean, it's just he just didn't discover the body. And also, Dale Kyle said, well, he didn't want to call the police and say who he was. You know, he was anonymous for the first 8 months. He didn't come forward because he said the reason that he didn't do it was because he was afraid he would end up like that guy he saw. Well, if you discovered a body in the park, would you think that you would be murdered by calling the police and telling them you found a dead body? I mean, it's just ludicrous.
Especially when it's supposed to be a suicide.
The story is ludicrous. And I think that one of the reasons they planted him is because they didn't want to. Oh, and also we have we went through the 911 call. It wasn't from Dale Kyle; it was from his Park Service workers. Two 911 calls, and they overlap. They're ginned up. They're made up transcripts. They're not. They overlap. The time overlaps on the two transcripts, and it's. The report when you call in, they didn't do a very good job when they ginned up these transcripts. It doesn't have the ring of truth to it when you read it. So he did not discover the body. I think that one of the reasons that they sort of brought him forward and say that he discovered the body was because so they could lead people down the wrong path. Kyle said that there was no gun. He said. I looked in his hand, and there was no gun. There was he thought that the man was obviously dead. He said he thought that somebody had hit him in the head with a rock. You know, no gun. I mean, so if you're sort of an investigator, or if you're kind of a student of the case, you would pay a lot of attention to that. You would say, well, you know, this guy. Well, he didn't discover. He made up the whole thing. He didn't discover the body. He said that he pulled into the park and walked up. It's like 600 feet up into the park where Vince Foster's body was. He said he pulled it over into the park to urinate. Well, Patrick did the same. That's what Patrick did, and he walked like 30 feet into the park, the first big tree, and then got back in his car and left. Dale Kyle took off his shirt and took a big long walk 600 feet up into the park to urinate. I mean, the whole thing is just he's lying. Another thing about the car that I didn't mention earlier was that there was a couple in the park. This is after Patrick had left. A couple pulled in, and they were sitting in the parking lot, and they saw this older Arkansas Honda, the one that Patrick saw, and they saw two men, one man standing by the passenger's door, and the other man with the hood up of the car, tinkering with like there was something wrong with it, with the car. It was just, there. Now, that doesn't appear anywhere in the Star report. They don't say anything about that. All they say was nothing unusual happened in the park. Well, you got people, they're claiming this is Vince Foster's car, which it wasn't. Who are these two people? Who are the people that are hanging around the car, and why is somebody looking under the hood? I mean, it's just everywhere you